If you've been around UU spaces for a while, you probably remember the 7 principles. Up until the vote at our Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly this past summer, the 7 principles were our common shorthand for what this odd alternative religion is all about. It's what you got if you Googled Unitarian Universalism and what many of us reached for when trying to explain ourselves to family and friends. I could recite the principles to you to the tune of Do Re Mi. The 6 sources got a little less limelight, but they were right there next to the 7 principles in our denominational bylaws. With the revision of Article 2 this summer, the principles were replaced with updated values, and our sources were replaced with updated inspirations. Before the 2024 General Assembly, the language in Article 2 read as follows. I'll read it to you. I don't think you can read that, but the living tradition which we share draws from many sources. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And finally, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Grateful for the religious pluralism, which enriches and ennobles our faith, we are inspired to deepen our understanding and expand our vision. The new language, crafted over 3 years with the input of thousands of UUs and adopted with an 80% vote at the 2024 General Assembly, reads as follows. Direct experiences of transcending mystery and wonder are primary sources of Unitarian Universalist inspiration. These experiences open our hearts, renew our spirits, and transform our lives. We draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which these sources were created and are currently practiced. Grateful for the experiences that move us, aware of the religious ancestries we inherit, and enlivened by the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. For me personally, the 6 sources I grew up with will continue to be a touchstone and inspiration for my own spirituality. And I'm inspired by our democratic embodiment of revision and living covenants and transformation. Our founding documents, our most sacred declarations, are not carved in stone, immutable for generations to come. Each generation of UUs is invited to participate in the writing of who we are. In the minute of silence to follow, I invite your reflection on the inspirations and sources that nourish your spirit and shape your living.
This sermon is part 4 in an ongoing series on living our UU values and covenant. It's no problem for understanding today's sermon if you missed any of the previous entries, and they're also available in our online sermon archive at frederickuu.org/sermons if you're interested in catching up. We'll continue to revisit this topic once a month to learn more about our new UU values and covenant that, as Emily mentioned, were passed this summer at UU General Assembly, often abbreviated as GA. We are a people of the acronym, so if we're ever doing that and you're like, what are you talking about? You're welcome to interrupt and ask. Where is GA this summer? Baltimore, right. Who's going? Not? Well, I hope so. I see quite a few hands. It'll be Wednesday through Sunday, June 18th through 22nd. And especially if you've never been to a UU General Assembly before, I strongly encourage you to go to at least one day, if not more than one day. It's a really interesting experience to be in the room with like 3,500 to 5,000 other UUs. And just it'll give you a great crash course in kind of the larger UU movement. So really think about it, and you Google uua.org/GA for more information. For now, turning to these new UU values and covenant, this month we're focusing on our new inspirations paragraph, which replaced, as Emily mentioned, our previous 6 sources. Different ones of us will resonate in greater and lesser degrees with various aspects of the inspiration, but the whole paragraph is trying to take a balcony view on our big tent movement. You already heard Emily read them, so I won't read them again, but they're also on the back. That paragraph is also on the back of your order of service. There's a lot to say about it, but as an introduction, I want to go into 4 aspects in particular. First, there's significance in this shift from this old numbered list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sources to this new paragraph. If some of you will know the saying, the medium is the message. Sometimes the medium in which we do things changes the message. And an enumerated list can give the impression that the sources higher on the list are more important. This new paragraph tries to put all of our inspirations on a more equal playing field. The old sources list was also more specific about naming some of the world's religions. Anytime you start to name some and not all, you kind of get into trouble. The danger of that choice is that adherents of some of the world's religions were like, well, why weren't we included? And the answer was often like kind of historical emphasis, but we're trying to kind of move into a new way forward that is more equal for all. So in this new version, we haven't lost anything from the old 6 sources, but this new paragraph is a more inclusive descriptions of all the wells from which we seek to draw. Second, I want to say more about the first sentence of this new inspirations paragraph. It's very similar to our previous UU first source. Direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder are primary sources of UU inspiration. This, in particular, the word transcending is an allusion to our 19th century forebears, the Transcendentalists, many of whom were Unitarian and or had a strong influence on Unitarianism. Transcendentalists often criticized the Unitarianism of their day for being too coldly intellectual and rational. They challenged our movement to open our hearts to direct, emotional, firsthand experience. They were really influenced by like the Romantics, the Romantic movement. It's important to read, not like romance novels, right, like Keats and Coleridge, and not there's anything wrong with romance novels. It's important to read this emphasis on direct experience in the larger context of that inspirations paragraph. The third sentence clarifies that we have a very broad definition of what we mean by direct experience. It says that we draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. In contrast to theologically conservative religious traditions, which are often actively hostile to the secular world and to science, UUs are wide open. We try to be open to wisdom wherever it is to be found. Fourth, let's turn to next to the last sentence of our inspirations paragraph. We respect the histories, the contexts, and the cultures in which these sources were created and are currently practiced. The goal of respecting the sources of our inspiration, it raises the question of, are we in right relationship or not? Being open to wisdom from all the world's religions is admirable in many ways, and at least for my money, is strongly preferable to thinking that we have the one true way. But we also need to acknowledge that religious borrowing can sometimes cause harm despite our best intentions. Religious appropriation is the technical term for when outsiders to a religious tradition act in a way that is offensive to insiders to that tradition. Here's one definition from Liz Bukhar, who's a religious ethicist at Northwestern University. When individuals adopt religious practices without committing to religious doctrines, ethical values, systems of authority and institutions, and do so in ways that exacerbate existing systems of structural injustice. A similar way of describing this is religious stealing, when someone takes a valuable object or a valuable practice without permission from its historic owner and causes harm. Now, let me hasten to add, this is complicated and controversial territory. In the same way that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, one person's cultural appropriation is no big deal, depending on who you're talking to. There's a wide spectrum of opinions. So how do we proceed respectfully within reason? How do we try to stay in right relationship? I want to invite us to begin wrestling with these thorny ethical issues with 3 case studies. Let's start with the Christian tradition, then we're going to turn to examples in Hinduism and Buddhism. Christianity is currently the world's largest religion. You see it there in red, with 2.6 billion adherents today. It has a rate of growth to be around 3 billion by 2050. As a point of comparison, Islam is actually on track to be the world's largest religion by 2070 because it's very dominant in countries with high birth rates. Christianity, though, is currently the biggest kid on the playground. So on the one hand, Christian nationalists who want to make this country a theologically conservative Christian nation can often feel like they're bullying non-Christians. That's because they are trying to bully non-Christians. That's a serious problem. We've explored that in previous sermons, but given our focus today, if our goal is to be respectful, does the size of Christianity mean that just because Christianity has bad actors, does that mean that just anyone can do what they want with objects and practices from the Christian tradition? Here's one prominent example. The cross historically was a symbol of Roman state execution. How did it become a fashion accessory? If the cross has spiritual significance to you, I'm not talking to you. Please don't email me afterwards. What I'm inviting us to consider is that wearing a Christian cross as mere jewelry, divorced from its original religious and political significance, is like wearing a decorative guillotine, an ornamental electric chair, or a bejeweled hypodermic needle. I'm really serious. We have lost touch, many of us, with what the cross really represents. Many historians of religion trace this origin back to the 1930s when the French fashion designer Coco Chanel began selling bracelets with the 8-pointed Maltese cross that the Order of St. John had adopted almost 4 centuries earlier. From there, it grew. By the 1960s to oversized, bedazzled crosses were mainstream fashion. Then by the 1970s, so instead of like crucifixes, suddenly you have evangelical Christians wearing crosses, plain crosses, without Jesus on them, to reclaim cross pendants as a sign of deep Christian commitments. That was sort of the world into which I was born. Some of you kind of watched that transition happen. And suddenly with the evangelicals in the 70s, the accessory meant something theological again. To approach this topic from a different angle, I'm also old enough to remember Madonna's music video, Like a Prayer. Do y'all remember that was... Yeah, it was a lot. Actually, I think it was great. I'm actually a big fan of the Immaculate Collection, but that's another sermon. I would also defend Madonna's choice to wear a cross in that video because she is making an intentionally theologically subversive piece of art that I think is actually quite profound if you unpack that video. Most theologically conservative Christians would disagree with me. But you can add that to the very long list of things that theologically conservative Christians disagree with me about, and I with them. In contrast, I actually feel differently about the gala a few years ago at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, which selected as its theme, Heavenly Bodies, Fashion, and the Catholic Imagination. I had a ton of these, and some of them were on the cutting room floor. I'm just going to show you a few. Lana Del Rey dressed as a Gucci tribute to Our Lady of Sorrows with 7 daggers piercing her heart. Rihanna came dressed as the Pope. I know, it is funny. I don't know. Ariana Grande's Vera Wang garment turned Michelangelo's Last Judgment from the Sistine Chapel into a flowing chiffon gown, imagining the resurrected, with the resurrected Christ placed strategically on her chest. Sarah Jessica Parker had a complete Neapolitan nativity scene on her head. Now, don't get me wrong. We live in a free country, at least for now, and I will defend anyone's First Amendment right to free speech to be as offensive and heretical as they want to be. But our UU inspirations call us to be respectful. And unless, like Madonna, these celebrities were trying to make a theological, ethical, or artistic point, I'm sympathetic to Christians who are outraged at this Met Gala and rallied around the hashtag, "My religion is not your costume." Here's 2 parallel examples. A few years ago, Grammy winner Cardi B, who is Afro-Latina and Christian, was featured on the cover of Footwear News, dressed as the Hindu goddess Durga. Or we can consider the time, some of you remember this, when Beyonce, who is black, dressed up as an Indian woman in a Coldplay video, Hymn for the Weekends. In both these cases, there was strong criticism of a Western person appropriating an Eastern image just to promote their celebrity brand. In all of these cases, at least as far as I can see, these celebrities were not trying to make profound political, theological, or artistic points. They were using religion as a fashion accessory or to commodify other people's spirituality to make money for themselves. And again, let me be clear, this is not illegal, at least not in the United States, at least not yet. Nor should it be, but arguably it is unethical. And it is disrespectful appropriation of another person's culture, heritage, identity, or religion. For the second of these 3 case studies, let's turn up the difficulty level. Though some of you may disagree with me already, and that's okay. It's a free country. There are some folks, especially contemporary Hindu fundamentalists, who argue that any non-Hindu person doing yoga is engaged in religious appropriation. You may be unsurprised to learn that I disagree with Hindu fundamentalists about as much as I disagree with Christian fundamentalists. As we explored last week about the messy and diverse origins of Christianity, the origins of yoga, and of all the world's religions, beliefs, and practices generally are messy and complicated. Modern yoga, as we know it today, actually emerged as a result of British colonialism. As 19th century European practices of athleticism in general and British military physical fitness culture in specific encountered ancient Hindu philosophy. For instance, the ancient Hindu text called the Yoga Sutras, which dates back more than 1,600 years, outlines 8 major limbs or practices of yoga, but contemporary yoga only emphasizes one of those 8 limbs, called the asanas, which is the Sanskrit word meaning body postures. In other words, the aspects of the ancient Indian practice of yoga that were brought forth and popularized in the contemporary world, that was brought forth by the Indians themselves, was the ones that the British imperialists deemed valuable. So the practice of yoga, as we know it today, evolved out of an interaction of East and West and likely would never have evolved in the way it has otherwise. By no means am I trying to be pro-imperialist. Again, don't email me about that afterwards. Rather, I'm trying to help us notice that the closer you look, the clearer it becomes that the actual history of how religions change and evolve is almost always messy, complex, and convoluted. Modern Hindu fundamentalists, they have invented a myth that today's yoga is a replica of ancient Indian practices. But the truth is that modern yoga is best understood as the result of an interaction of multiple South Indian traditions, nationalism, imperialism, capitalism, and globalization. It's okay if that makes you want to scream, ah! I recognize that historical baggage is a lot to carry when you're just trying to decompress on your yoga mat. There's a lot to say about how to practice yoga respectfully, and I will plan a future sermon on decolonizing yoga. If you're curious to learn more in the meantime, one scholar doing some very interesting work in this area is the Indiana University religious studies scholar Andrea Jain in her 2 recent books, Selling Yoga from Counterculture to Pop Culture, and Peace, Love, Yoga, The Politics of Global Spirituality. And if you look closely, those of you who have bought the textbook that we're studying during the middle hour, you'll notice on that top right in small print, Andrea Jain is also one of the co-authors, one of the 4 co-authors under Kripal as the lead author of this textbook, Comparing Religions. If you don't have time to read any of those books, fair enough. Here's a good starting point if yoga is a regular practice for you. First, be aware of Western yoga teachers who you just sense in your gut are disrespectfully playing Indian or using Hindu culture as a costume. Second, as you're able, learn more about the history of yoga to be more in right relationship with that tradition. Yoga is really important to me. It's something I've practiced for decades. That same sort of approach applies to respectfully using objects or practices from any tradition to which you're currently more of an outsider than an insider. I'll move toward my conclusion with a final example of my own evolving relationship to Buddhism over time. I was not born Buddhist. I was raised Southern Baptist in South Carolina. I became increasingly liberal in college and then spent my first decade as a minister from 2003 to 2012 serving progressive liberal Christian congregations. Around 2009, I became increasingly interested in Buddhism when I started listening to a podcast called Buddhist Geeks. And became increasingly serious about meditation. I joined their Sangha, and a little over a decade later, in 2012, I was authorized as a Dharma teacher by the 2 lead teachers of Buddhist Geeks, Emily and Vince Horn. Emily is authorized to teach by Spirit Rock Meditation Center. Have any of you been there in California? All right, I see a hand or 2. That was founded by Jack Kornfield, a name some of you will know. Vince is authorized to teach in the pragmatic Dharma tradition of Kenneth Folk and Trudy Goodman, guiding teacher of Insight LA, who also happens to be married to Jack Kornfield. They're really a power couple. Jack, in turn, was authorized to teach by the Thai forest monk Ajahn Chah. If we had more time, we could trace further strands of this lineage. I bring all this up to make 2 final points about navigating this tricky and controversial territory between respect and appropriation. On the one hand, a significant part of my own recent journey has been drawing wisdom from the Buddhist tradition in ways that seek to be in right relationship. In particular, that has meant seeking out teachers and communities that are part of the tradition and deeply steeped in it. On the other hand, we need to be really honest that Jack Kornfield innovated and expanded the Buddhist tradition for a Western audience in ways that Ajahn Chah wouldn't recognize. And I suspect Ajahn Chah actually did his own innovation within the Thai forest tradition. In turn, Vince and Emily are expanding the Buddhist tradition and meditative practices beyond what they learned from Jack and Trudy and others of their teachers, and I'm likely doing so as well within a UU context. It is a complicated dance to both respect the histories and contexts and cultures in which these sources were created, as our UU inspiration practice paragraph calls us to do, and to responsibly innovate, as humans have done throughout time, to help evolve and carry these traditions into the future to meet unique contemporary needs that previous generations and previous teachers just couldn't even have imagined. That dynamic is summed up in the final sentence of our inspirations paragraph. Grateful for the experiences that move us, aware of the religious ancestries that we inherit, and enlivened by the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom, or as Maya Angelou said, as you know better, do better. May it be so, and I am grateful to be on that journey with all of you. In that spirit, please rise, embody your spirit. Let's sing together number 193, Our Faith is But a Single Gem. As we prepare to go into the rest of this day and into the week to come, may you continue your journey with love, just as Roland's noted at the center, and now as we have at the center of our values. Care for one another, care for this one earth, do justice and make peace. And as you go, whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and place of hope, of love, of peace, of joy, that goes with you out into the world. We're different for having spent this time together. And in this hard time, continue to look for all that remains good and true and beautiful. May you live boldly and with thanksgiving.